I'd been married to Daniel for 12 years when I found the receipt. Not for jewelry or flowers or anything romantic meant for me. A receipt for 2 first-class tickets to Paris, leaving in 3 days. My hands were shaking as I stood in our bedroom, holding this little piece of paper that was about to blow up my entire life. Because Daniel had told me he was going to a medical conference in Denver, said it would be boring, that I shouldn't waste my time coming along, and I'd believed him. God. I'd actually believed him. Let me tell you who I am because it matters. My name is Sarah, and I'm not some naive housewife who buries her head in the sand. I'm a senior analyst at a cybersecurity firm. I solve problems for a living. I find things people don't want found. And somehow, I'd missed this happening right under my nose in my own marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat on our bed, that receipt burning in my hands trying to decide what to do next. I could have confronted him, right then. Could have thrown the receipt in his face, demanded explanations, started the whole messy divorce process. But something in me wanted proof, needed to see it with my own eyes, needed to understand who she was, how long this had been going on, whether my entire marriage had been a lie or just the last few months of it. So I made a decision that probably wasn't healthy, definitely wasn't rational, but felt absolutely necessary in that moment. I was going to Paris. I was going to follow him, and I was going to catch him in the act. The receipt had the flight number, the date, the time. I called my boss, told her I had a family emergency and needed 3 days off. She didn't ask questions. Then I went online and booked myself a ticket on the same flight. Different row, different section, but same plane. My credit card protested the last-minute international flight cost, but I didn't care. Some things are worth the debt. The next 3 days were surreal. Daniel packed his suitcase while I watched, asking him about the conference, what sessions he was excited about, whether he'd bring me back anything from Denver. He lied so smoothly it made my skin crawl. Talked about panel discussions and networking events, and how he'd try to catch a Rockies game if he had time. I smiled and nodded, and felt something inside me die a little more with each word. This man I'd loved for 12 years, who I'd built a life with, who I'd trusted completely, was looking me in the eye, and lying like it was nothing. The morning he left for the airport, I kissed him goodbye at the door, told him I loved him. He said it back, and I wondered if those words had ever been true. Then I waited exactly 1 hour, grabbed my own carefully packed suitcase, and headed to the airport myself. My heart was pounding the entire drive. This was insane. I was following my husband to Paris to catch him cheating. This was something that happened in movies, not in my life. But I couldn't stop now. At the airport, I hung back, watching him from a distance. I'd dressed differently than usual. Hair pulled back, sunglasses on, nondescript clothes. I know it sounds paranoid, but I didn't want him spotting me by accident. I watched him go through security, watched him head to the gate. And that's when I saw her. She appeared out of nowhere, practically running up to him, and he spun around and caught her in his arms like something out of a romance movie. They kissed. Right there in the terminal. Not a quick peck, a real kiss. The kind of kiss that made it very clear this wasn't new, wasn't casual, wasn't a mistake. She was younger than me. Of course she was. Maybe late 20s, long dark hair, the kind of effortlessly beautiful that made me suddenly aware of every flaw I saw in the mirror each morning. She was laughing at something he said, touching his arm, looking at him the way I used to look at him before 12 years of marriage and routine and taking each other for granted. I stood there behind a pillar, watching my husband with another woman, and felt absolutely nothing. Just this weird, cold emptiness where my heart should have been breaking. I boarded the plane before them, kept my head down, pretended to sleep. 8 hours to Paris. 8 hours to figure out what I was going to do when we landed. Part of me wanted to march up to them right then, make a scene at 30,000 feet. But I waited. Patience has always been my strongest quality, even when my world was falling apart. I wanted to see how far this went. Needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before I decided how to respond. We landed at Charles de Gaulle at 7 in the morning local time. I followed them through customs, through baggage claim, kept my distance as they got into a taxi together. I got into the next cab and did something I'd only seen in movies. I told the driver to follow that car. He gave me a look like he'd been waiting his entire career for someone to say that, and off we went into Paris morning traffic. They went to a hotel in the Marais district. Boutique, romantic, the kind of place you take someone when you want to impress them. I watched them check in from across the street, watched them head to the elevator, watched the numbers tick up to the 4th floor. Then I waited 15 minutes, walked into that same hotel lobby, and approached the front desk with my credit card and my wedding ring very visible on my finger. The desk clerk was a young woman with kind eyes. I said in my best broken French and then English that my husband had just checked in and I wanted to surprise him, but I'd lost the room number. Could she help me? I gave her Daniel's name. She looked uncomfortable, glanced at her computer screen, and I saw the exact moment she realized what was happening. That I was the wife, that there was another woman upstairs, that she was in the middle of something messy. She told me she couldn't give out room numbers. Hotel policy. But she looked at me with such sympathy that I knew she wanted to help. So I tried a different approach. I told her the truth. Told her I'd followed my husband from the United States, that I knew he was here with someone else, that I just needed to see it with my own eyes before my marriage ended. Maybe it was the jet lag making me honest. Maybe I was just too tired to lie anymore. But something in my voice must have gotten through to her, because she wrote a number on a piece of hotel stationery and slid it across the desk. Room 412. I took the elevator up, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The hallway was quiet, elegant, with thick carpet that muffled my footsteps. I found room 412 and stood outside it for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute. I could hear voices inside. Laughter. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. What was I doing? What was the plan here? Burst in and catch them? Scream? Cry? Demand an, explanation? I realized I hadn't thought this through at all, but I'd come this far. I knocked. 3 sharp raps that sounded like gunshots in the quiet hallway. The voices inside stopped immediately. I heard footsteps. The door opened, and Daniel stood there in a hotel robe, his hair wet from a shower, looking at me with an expression that went from confusion to recognition to absolute horror in about 3 seconds. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Behind him, I could see her standing by. The window, wrapped in another robe, frozen like a deer in headlights. I said very calmly, "Hi, honey. Surprise." The look on his face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Pure panic. He tried to speak, stuttered, couldn't form words. I pushed past him into the room, and that's when I got a good look at her up close, and my blood turned to ice, because I knew her. Not well, but I knew her. She was Daniel's medical assistant, had been for 2 years. I'd met her at office parties, had made small talk with her, had even complimented her shoes once. Her name was Emma. She was crying now, mascara running down her face, saying she was sorry over and over. Daniel finally found his voice and started with the excuses. It wasn't what it looked like. They could explain, this was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. All the greatest hits of cheating spouse cliches. I just stood there, weirdly calm, looking around this romantic Paris hotel room where my husband had brought his assistant and waited for them to stop talking. When they finally ran out of words, I said, "I want you both to get dressed. We're going to have breakfast in the hotel restaurant, all 3 of us. And you're going to tell me everything, how long this has been going on, how it started, all of it. And then I'm going to decide what happens next." Daniel started to protest, said we should talk privately, but I cut him off. I said if he wanted any chance of this ending without me making the biggest scene Paris had seen in years, he'd do exactly what I said. 20 minutes later, we were sitting at a corner table in the hotel restaurant. Other guests were enjoying their croissants and coffee, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the corner. Emma couldn't look at me. Daniel couldn't stop trying to explain. And I just sat there, drinking my coffee, listening to my marriage dissolve in real time. It had been going on for 8 months. Started at a medical conference, ironically an IYS actual one in San Diego. 1 too many drinks, 1 moment of weakness, and then it just kept happening. Secret meetings, late nights at the office that weren't actually about work, and now this trip to Paris that was supposed to be their romantic getaway. The worst part wasn't the cheating itself. It was how easy it had been for them. How I'd suspected nothing. How 12 years of marriage had mattered so little that he could just start a whole separate life and I'd been completely blind to it. I asked Emma if she felt guilty. She said yes, constantly, but that she loved him. She actually said that she loved my husband. I asked Daniel if he loved her. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. That's when I stood up, very calmly, and said I was going to the restroom. I walked away from that table, made it to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and finally broke down. Let myself cry for the first time since finding that receipt. Mourned the marriage I thought I had, the husband I thought I knew, the life I'd built that turned out to be constructed on lies. I gave myself 5 minutes to fall apart. Then I washed my face, fixed my makeup, and walked back out there. Except when I got back to the table, they were gone. Both of them, just gone. I looked around the restaurant, confused, then saw the waiter approaching with a concerned expression. He handed me a note written on hotel stationery. Daniel's handwriting. I'm sorry. We left. I'll call File. You when I'm back in the States. I'm sorry. That was it. Not even the decency to face me after I'd confronted them. They'd run, like cowards. I sat back down at that table, alone in a Paris restaurant, and started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all. I'd flown across an ocean, tracked them down, confronted them, and they'd literally run away. The waiter asked if I was okay. I said I was perfect, and ordered the most expensive breakfast on the menu. If I was going to have a breakdown in Paris, I was at least going to eat well while doing it. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because as I was sitting there, eating my overpriced omelet and trying to figure out what to do next, my phone rang. Unknown number. French country code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice, speaking English with a French accent, asked if I was Sarah Mitchell. I said yes. She said her name was Genevieve, and she was calling from the hotel front desk. The clerk who'd given me the room number. She asked if I could come down to the lobby, said it was important. I went downstairs, found her waiting by the entrance, looking nervous. She led me to a quiet corner and said she needed to tell me something. That after I'd gone upstairs, she'd felt terrible about giving me that room number. She knew she could get in trouble, so she'd watched the hotel cameras just to make sure I was okay. And she'd seen something strange. After Daniel and Emma had run from the restaurant, they hadn't gone back to their room. They'd gotten into an argument in the hallway, a bad one. Yelling, Emma crying, Daniel looking panicked. And then another man had appeared, come right up to them, said something, and both Daniel and Emma had gone white as sheets. This man had led them out of the hotel, not forcefully, but firmly. And they'd gone with him willingly, though both of them looked terrified. Genevieve had watched them get into a black car and drive away. She'd been watching the cameras for the last hour and they hadn't come back. She wanted to know if she should call the police, if I knew who that man was. But I didn't. I had no idea what she was talking about. She took me to the security office and showed me the footage. Grainy black and white, but clear enough. There was Daniel and Emma in the hallway arguing, and then this man appeared. Tall, well-dressed, dark hair. He said something I couldn't hear, and the change in their expressions was immediate. Fear. Real fear. He gestured toward the exit, and they followed him like children. The timestamp showed this was 40 minutes ago. My mind was racing. Who was this man? Why would Daniel and Emma go with him? Where were they now? Part of me wanted to say it wasn't my problem anymore. Daniel had made his choice, had betrayed me, had run away rather than face the consequences. Whatever trouble he was in now, he'd earned it. But 12 years of marriage don't disappear in one morning. No, matter how much you want them to. I was still his wife. I was still worried. And I was still in Paris with no idea what was happening. I asked Genevieve if she could email me that video footage. She hesitated, said she could get fired, but something about the situation had spooked her enough that she agreed. Then I went back up to room 412, using the keycard Daniel had left on the breakfast table in his hurry to escape. The room was exactly as they'd left it. Suitcases open, clothes everywhere. Emma's purse on the nightstand. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I searched through everything, looking for what I didn't know. Clues, answers, anything that would explain what was happening. In Daniel's suitcase under his clothes, I found a folder. Medical records, but not from his practice. These were financial documents. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. Large deposits, regular payments, all labeled as consulting fees. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Money I'd never known about, going into accounts I'd never seen. My husband, the doctor I thought barely made enough to cover our mortgage, apparently had $500,000 I didn't know existed. And there was more. Emails printed out, conversations between Daniel and people I didn't recognize, talking about procedures, payments, patients who needed to be kept quiet. My hands were shaking as I read through them. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was involved in, something illegal. Something that, from what I could piece together, involved unnecessary medical procedures being performed for profit, insurance fraud, kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies. He was dirty, and someone knew it. That's when my phone rang again. Daniel's number this time. I answered, and his voice came through, strained and terrified. He said, "Sarah, I need your help. Please. I know you have every reason to hate me right now, but I need you to listen. I'm in trouble. We both are, Emma and I. There are people here who know about things I've done, and they want something from me. Money. A lot of money. And if I don't give it to them, they're going to..." He trailed off, and I heard Emma crying in the background. I should have hung up. Should have let him deal with the consequences of whatever shady business he'd gotten himself into. But that voice in my head, the one that had loved him for 12 years, couldn't do it. I asked him where he was. He gave me an address. In the suburbs, said to come alone, said not to call the police, all the classic red flags. But I wrote it down anyway. Then I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd found those documents. I asked him who these people were and what he'd done. There was a long silence. Then he told me the truth. For years, he'd been running a scheme through his medical practice, performing unnecessary procedures, billing insurance companies, taking kickbacks. He thought he was being careful, thought no one would notice. But someone had noticed. A medical insurance investigator who'd been building a case against him for months. And that investigator had evidence that could send Daniel to prison for years. But the investigator was dirty too. Wanted to be paid off. And he'd chosen Paris, far from American law enforcement, to collect. The man from the hotel video wasn't just some random criminal. He was the investigator. And he'd been following Daniel and Emma since they'd landed in France, waiting for the right moment to approach them. And that moment had been right after I'd confronted them in the restaurant, when they were vulnerable and panicked and not thinking clearly. He'd led them to a location outside the city and told them the price of his silence, $300,000, money Daniel had hidden away in those secret accounts, but couldn't access easily from France. And here's where it gets truly insane. Daniel needed my help because I was the only one who could access those accounts. He'd set them up using both of our social security numbers for some tax reason I didn't understand. He needed me to authorize the transfers, to save him from prison, to save Emma too, since she'd been involved in some of the fraudulent billing. He was begging me, the wife he'd betrayed, to help him pay off a blackmailer so he wouldn't go to jail for crimes he'd actually committed. I sat in that hotel room, surrounded by evidence of my husband's infidelity and criminal activity, and laughed until I cried. This was my life now. This was what my marriage had become. A cheating husband, a fraud scheme, a blackmail plot in Paris. It was so absurd it didn't feel real. I asked Daniel what made him think I would help him. What could he possibly say that would make me want to save him after everything he'd done? He said, "Because you're a good person, Sarah. Better than me. Better than I deserve. And because if I go to prison, you lose everything too. Our house, our savings, everything. It's all connected to my practice. If I go down, you go down with me financially. I know you hate me right now. I know I've destroyed everything we had. But please, I'm begging you. Help me this one last time, and then I'll give you the divorce. I'll give you everything. I'll disappear from your life forever. Just help me get out of this. I should have said no. Should have called the police, let justice take its course, accepted the financial fallout as the price of being married to a criminal. But he was right about one thing. Our finances were tangled together. The house we'd bought together, the credit cards, the investments. If he went down, I'd spend years trying to untangle myself from the legal mess. And there was something else. Something I'm not proud to admit. I wanted to see him squirm. Wanted him to owe me something so massive he'd never be able to justify what he'd done. Wanted him to know that I'd saved him even though he didn't deserve it. Call it petty. Call it revenge. But I told him I'd help. I took a taxi to the address he'd given me. A warehouse in an industrial area, exactly the kind of place you see in movies where bad things happen. Every instinct told me this was stupid, potentially dangerous, definitely not something I should be doing alone. But I was beyond rational thought at that point, running on rage and coffee and jet lag. I walked into that warehouse and there they were. Daniel, Emma, and this man in an expensive suit who looked more like a corporate executive than a blackmailer. He introduced himself as Marcus, said he appreciated me coming. Very polite, very professional, which somehow made the whole situation more unsettling. He explained the situation calmly. He had evidence of Daniel's fraud, years worth, enough to guarantee prison time. But he didn't want to ruin Daniel's life. He just wanted compensation for his time and discretion. $300,000, and everyone could walk away. Daniel could go back to his practice, be more careful in the future, and Marcus would destroy all the evidence. I asked him why I should believe he'd actually destroy it. What was stopping him from taking the money and blackmailing Daniel again in 6 months? Marcus smiled and said that was a fair question. He said he was retiring, moving to Portugal. This was his last job, his retirement fund. He had no interest in ongoing criminal enterprise, just one payment, and he'd disappear forever. It was almost funny how he made extortion sound like a reasonable business transaction. So I made my own deal. I'd authorize the transfers. I'd give him his money. But I wanted something in return beyond just Daniel's freedom. I wanted copies of all that evidence, everything Marcus had on Daniel, because I was going to need it for the divorce proceedings. I wanted to make sure I walked away from this marriage with everything I was entitled to. Marcus looked at me with something like respect and said he could arrange that. We had a deal. Right there in that warehouse, using my phone and Daniel's laptop, I authorized the transfers from those secret accounts. $300,000, wired to an account in the Cayman Islands. It took 20 minutes and felt completely surreal. Marcus verified the transfers, nodded, and then handed me a thumb drive. Said it contained everything. Then he looked at Daniel and said, "You're a lucky man. Not many wives would do this." Then he left. Just walked out of that warehouse and disappeared into Paris. $300,000 richer. The three of us stood there in silence. Finally, Emma said she should go. Daniel didn't stop her. She looked at me one more time, said she was sorry again, and left too. Then it was just me and Daniel in that empty warehouse. My husband of 12 years who I'd just saved from prison after catching him cheating in Paris. He tried to thank me. I cut him off. Told him I didn't want to hear it. Told him that when we got back to the States, I was filing for divorce. That he'd give me everything without a fight because I now had evidence of his crimes and could still turn him in if I wanted to. That whatever we'd had was over. Dead. Buried in this warehouse in Paris. He nodded. Said he understood. Asked if we could at least fly home together, or if I wanted him to take a different flight. I told him I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. So we flew back. Together, sitting separately, not speaking, two strangers who used to be married. When we landed, he went to his office, I went to our house, and I started packing his things. That was 6 months ago. The divorce was finalized last week. I got the house, the savings, most of everything. Daniel signed whatever I put in front of him, didn't fight anything. His practice is still running, though I heard he let Emma go. He's seeing a therapist, apparently, trying to figure out how he destroyed his, life. I wouldn't know. We don't speak. I moved on. Started over. Tried to rebuild the life that exploded that day I found the receipt for Paris. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. That thumb drive Marcus gave me, I copied all the files, gave some to my lawyer for the divorce, and kept the rest as insurance. And one night, unable to sleep, I went through everything on it. All of Daniel's crimes, all the evidence Marcus had collected, and buried in those files, I found something. That didn't make sense. Photos of Daniel and Emma, yes. Financial records, yes. But also photos of me, at my office, at the grocery store, at the gym. Dozens of photos taken over months. I'd been under surveillance too. Marcus hadn't just been investigating Daniel, he'd been investigating me. And there was a document, a report, about my work at the cybersecurity firm, about my skills, my access, my clearances, about what I could potentially do for the right price. Marcus hadn't been a medical, insurance investigator at all. That was just the cover story. He'd been something else entirely, something bigger. And the whole setup in Paris, the blackmail, getting me involved, making me authorize those transfers, all of it had been a test. To see if I could be compromised, to see if I'd break the law to protect someone I cared about, and I'd passed, or failed, depending on how you looked at it. The last file on that thumb drive was an email draft. Never sent, just saved. Addressed to someone with a code name, not a real name. It said, "Subject shows promise. Skilled, resourceful, willing to bend rules under pressure. Recommend recruitment for phase 2. And it was dated 2 days after we returned from Paris. I'd been marked, tagged as someone potentially useful for something I didn't understand. And now I'm sitting here, 6 months later, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for someone to contact me, to call in whatever debt I supposedly owe, because I'm starting to realize that the whole thing in Paris, the cheating, the blackmail, maybe even Daniel's entire scheme, might have been orchestrated to get to me. And if that's true, then nothing I thought I knew about my life is real. And the question isn't what happened in Paris. The question is what happens next.